rich resources. Of course, one of the reasons that continues to motivate Beijing to become more assertive and militarize the entire South China Sea to its favor. China is showing its displeasure regarding the Philippines' desire to effectively stand up for what is rightfully theirs in terms of international law and the 2016 ruling. The international community was quick, of course, to support Manila's interest, legitimate interest based on international law and the provocations of China.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Forgive me, but I'm going to do away with the pleasantries and get right into it. I want to start with this. The footage you're looking at was filmed from a Philippines patrol ship in the South China Sea. The vessel, carrying a group of journalists and videographers, was navigating through the South China Sea near the second Thomas Shoal. It was intercepted by a Chinese ship, which then blocked the BRP Sindangan's path in the high seas. The Chinese Coast Guard vessel, in fact, came within a meter of colliding with the Philippine patrol ship. Now, this took place on October 4th, but since then, there have been other incidents which Manila has accused Beijing of conducting dangerous maneuvers in the disputed waters. Well, to discuss the tensions in the high seas and maritime politics, we're joined by Don McLain Gill. He's a lecturer at the Department of International Studies of the Salle University in Manila in the Philippines. Thank you very much for being on the program today, Don.
Thank you so much for having me, Divya. It's a true pleasure.
Right, so we're just going to get right into it, as I said. Let's start with this incident in the second Thomas Shoal. How do you describe the actions of the Chinese Coast Guard ship?
Right, thank you. And, we have to take this into context, not as an isolated case, but within the overarching pattern of what China continues to do, particularly in the West Philippine Sea. So what we're trying to see here is that China is trying to test the waters, amid the strengthening U.S.-Philippines alliance and the strengthening strategic partnership between the Philippines, Japan, and Australia, for example, and the West. China has been trying to take note of how the U.S. and its extended alliance network would respond towards its recent provocations. And this will allow, of course, China to gauge how far it could go to achieve its strategic interests at the expense of Philippine sovereignty and sovereign rights without triggering a shooting war with the U.S. And of course, this is in line with the recent provocations this weekend as well. So given that China is well aware of its material limitations, its military limitations, even within the Western Pacific, it has been engaged in what we call salami slicing activities, and it takes up from General Zhang's statement of a cabbage strategy, in which it is provoking the status quo without the overt use of military force, in line with, of course, the use of the maritime militia, provocations from the Chinese Coast Guard, and all these aspects that would help China redraw not only the geography, but also the status quo narrative of the area. And this is, I think, the goal that China is continuously trying to achieve. And of course, the novel scenario here is that that Manila is more overtly steadfast towards the security of its sovereignty and sovereign rights, upholding the 2016 arbitral ruling, and of course, deepening and broadening the alliance network to this end. So this, of course, creates anxieties in Beijing, whether how it would be able to achieve its narrowly defined regional ambition.
And you've hit on so many points that I want to dig further deeper into as we go on in this program. But I want to take you to another incident, and that's less than 2 weeks after the October 4th incident. Now, on October 13th, near Titu Island, which is also known as Pag-asa Island in the Philippines, the 5th Philippine vessel BRP Benguet issued a radio warning to the People's Liberation Army Navy ship 621. Now, the fact that this is happening so close to the previous incident, what kind of a message is it sending, or what is China trying to say with this?
Well, at the most basic sense, China is showing its displeasure regarding the Philippines' desire to effectively stand up for what is rightfully theirs in terms of, what is rightfully the Philippines in terms of international law and the 2016 ruling. And this is, of course, something that is not sitting well with Beijing at a time when it seeks to solidify de facto regional exclusionary policies within Asia and the greater South China Sea, and of course engage more deeply in the U.S.-China power competition. So of course this is not sitting well with China, and thus this is a reaction to such the ability of Manila to more effectively and proactively stand up based on what it believes to be its own, based on international law. So we may be expecting, of course, this to continue in the long run. But of course, Manila has been taking actions in various instances in terms of broadcasting the provocations of China, engaging in intelligence sharing recently with Canada, and a recent MOU with India, and of course, the rest with Japan, Australia, and the US. So we're looking into ways how Manila is trying to level the playing field vis-a-vis China's provocative and belligerent actions in the West Philippine Sea.
Right. I'm so glad you brought up the point about Manila broadcasting these incidents now and putting it out in the international media sphere. Take a listen to this. Ray Powell is the director of Sea Light and project lead for Project Myoshu at Stanford University's Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. The 35-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force said getting international attention can give Philippines an advantage.
Well, the Philippines really stands out as being, I think, especially unique with regard to bringing these things to light. And we've come to call this tactic assertive transparency. So it's not just that the Philippines is releasing information or releasing pictures, is that they're out looking for pictures to release. We've seen them out, for example, filming the environmental damage at Iroquois Reef and Sabina Shoal. We've seen them out sending drones up when they expect to encounter Chinese vessels. So they are really looking to raise the reputational costs on China, and again to continue to gain that international support so that they can have something to push back with. The Philippines is not doesn't have a particularly robust Navy or Coast Guard. They're certainly brave, but they are not large. And they are certainly outmatched by the Chinese Coast Guard and Maritime Militia and their Navy, of course. And so this is something the Philippines can do to fight back. And it's been really a remarkable campaign. I'm not sure we've seen anything quite like it.
Right. He talks about assertive transparency. Is that aimed at an international audience, and is that getting the results they want, or is it more for a domestic audience?
Well, right. Mr. Powell's absolutely right in this. And in fact, he has been doing a great job in emphasizing this point. And we have to understand that it is the nature of Chinese gray zone activities. And of course, the role of sharp power projection, which means the use of disinformation to bend, the narratives that surround, international law, that surround the 2016 arbitral ruling is crucial in China's quest to, of course, maintain and increase its significance and influence in these areas. So, of course, Chinese gray zone activities seek to reorient public opinion, the global public opinion, towards what China is doing, and trying to reframe it as China being the victim in this resort. However, the Philippines' desire to broadcast these by allowing journalists from different news channels to go on board the Philippine Coast Guard vessels is an attempt to address this desire of China to bend the narratives, and of course by actually illustrating what is actually happening on the ground or at sea in this case. So this is in fact one of the most important ways to fight disinformation, by countering it with legitimate information. And this is something that the Philippines must continue to do. And you can see during the resupply missions that was quite controversial for the past few weeks, the international community was quick, of course, to support Manila's interest, legitimate interest based on international law, and the provocations of China towards such resupply missions and provocations.
Right. And so how does this play then for China domestically for them? We see the Philippines using this to rally international support, but does this not in effect then give China a showcase for its domestic audience?
Well, we have to understand the nature of the relationship between the government and its people. The regime in China, the Chinese regime, the CCP, relies largely on nationalistic sentiments, right? So hyper-nationalism. And in fact, these provocations, in fact, fuel nationalism at home. And that allows the domestic seat of power to gain significance at home. So, in line with external threats, the Beijing security perception is also largely rooted in domestic stability. So it's very important for course, that it is unwilling to compromise what it believes to be part of its own territory and part of its own agenda. And this is, in fact, part of the whole idea of fueling nationalist sentiments. So, of course, we can now understand why it is hard for China to engage diplomatically, to engage in alleviating the situation, because this may, in fact, make it seem weak at home. So it's faced with that. But however, now, by applying external pressure, this may add more cost to China's ability to have a free run in its assertive maneuvers, so to have to rethink its strategies. So again, it boils down to the consistency, how well we are able to press and apply cost to such belligerents within, of course, the West Philippine Sea in particular.
Let's talk about the resources in the sea itself. We're talking about barrels of untapped oil, cubic feet of natural gas. How much of this is a motivational factor?
Well, you're absolutely right, Divya. And in fact, resources in particular is of they're of critical importance to China, especially that it is a rising great power. You see China engaging in the Arctic, trying to engage in the Indian Ocean region through mega infrastructure projects that would try to increase its ability to achieve and to receive such energy resources that it would need to fuel its growth and its ambition. So definitely, beyond question, the rich resources in the greater South China Sea is of equal importance to China. And this is, of course, one of the reasons that continues to motivate Beijing to become more assertive and militarize the entire South China Sea to its favor, improving its anti-access area denial capabilities, and I've said earlier, establishing some sort of a de facto regional exclusionary policy. Because if we look at it also geopolitically, the greater South China Sea serves as somewhat of a shield, if you look at the map.
Right. You talked about a map. I'm going to show you a map. Let's take a look at the contested claims on the various parts of the South China Sea. Now, along with China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei have staked their claims in different areas. Taiwan, too, has claims on certain areas of the South China Sea there. Right. So taking a look at that map, with all these different countries claiming different portions, China claims almost the entire area. What are the Philippines' claims? Can you define how that relates to the Philippines physically?
Well, definitely. I think the Philippines' claims are well in line with international law. We are entitled to a nautical mile exclusive economic zone, the continental shelf, and of course we have the territorial sea. And the inquiry that we had made, and the result of that was achieved during the 2016 arbitral ruling, emphasizes, of course, the legitimate interests of the Philippines within its exclusive economic zone. However, this is not accepted by China. And in fact, if it's quite ironic, to think that throughout the negotiation process of the UNCLOS, China was backing the developing countries in establishing an exclusive economic zone, which was largely due to the negotiations of the developing world. However, it, as is shown in contemporary times, that it shows great selectivity in how it sees international law, and it continues to bend the principles of international law to its favor. And this, of course, is a problem in enhancing and strengthening the norms behind international law, because as we can see, power plays a huge role in this.
Right. I want to explain to our viewers a little bit more about those rulings you've spoken about, the UNCLOS. So the Philippines took the dispute to the Court of Arbitration under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS. Now, the verdict at The Hague in 2016 significantly refuted China's claims, observing there was no evidence that China had historically exercised exclusive control over the waters or their resources. Now, the South China Sea arbitration then concluded that there was no legal basis for China to claim historic rights to resources within the sea areas falling within the 9-dash line. And from there, I want you to listen to this, and this will take you to Taiwan's position. Now, as we know, China's 9-dash line already covers more than 90% of the South China Sea. But it's recently published a map adding another line across Taiwan to make it a 10- line. Chi-Ting Tsai, Associate Professor of International Law at the National Taiwan University in Taipei, gave us his view on the addition.
This is not China's first time to put their 10th line in their map, especially that the 10th at the east side of Taiwan. And so I would say that that is just as usual. But I think maybe some kinds of the context there can also answer to your question. I think that is lawfare. And because we know that actually a map is not really an evidence for different sovereign states to prove their sovereignty. However, this kind of the dash there can be a basis for them to make further effective control. And I think that because Xi Jinping, he has already has his third term, and we know that he might have the fourth term. And so for him to have a very successful fourth term, maybe the territorial issues, sovereignty issues can be a way for him to consolidate his domestic support.
So, Don, Taiping Island, which was mentioned there, is referred to as a rock by the UNCLOS arbitration verdict. So my question to you is there really any point of the UNCLOS verdict if those involved are not recognizing it?
Well, it's a double-edged sword, really. International law is as strong as the ability of states to uphold whatever is enshrined within it, right? So, of course, there is that responsibility. There's what we call customary international law as well. The responsibility to uphold what is stated. But of course, it is unavoidable how some states, especially those that feel that it does not reflect their narrowly driven interests, to look beyond international law and rather disrupt the regional security architecture unilaterally. And of course, this is what we're seeing now, particularly in the greater South China Sea. And the map making, as the professor has said, is a notorious habit of China to not only fuel domestic support, as I mentioned earlier, but also to show that it is steadfast in its goal, in its expansion and the power projections throughout the entire continent. So this is, of course, important for that signaling as well. Now, as you've said, China addresses certain features that are not, that are recognized as otherwise under UNCLOS as, as a key features. And this is, of course, also problematic. And, you can definitely see China using particular terminologies, law terminologies that are domestic in nature, and it's trying to extend it internationally as well to give more emphasis to its claims at the international level.
And incidentally, Taiwan does not also accept that arbitration award due to certain definitions of Taiwan, one, it being classified as a province. Now, let's talk about the Philippines. We've seen a significant shift in the Philippines as far as taking its stance and exerting its sovereignty over certain areas of the South China Seas. What caused that shift?
Well, it's actually quite interesting. When President Marcos Jr. His first few months as president, of course, and we could definitely see that there was this ardent desire to improve relations with China as well. And in fact, the ball was already passed to China's court from the beginning of his administration, stating that the Philippines will be willing to enhance its partnership with China as long as China recognizes its responsibilities of being a good neighbor. And of course, the January summit between President Xi Jinping and President Marcos Jr. led to a series of pledges on maintaining stability, creating hotlines, etc. But of course, there is a huge disconnect between what China says at the political level and what it does on the ground. And President Marcos Jr. was quick to recognize this discrepancy and then embarked in a more proactive policy of securing our sovereignty and sovereign rights, recognizing that it would be difficult to get China on board, with this initial desire. So, of course, in line with that, Manila has not only deepened its alliance with the U.S., but broadened it, including the expansion of EDCA, for example. It continues to narrow the gap, the functional gap of the hub and spoke system between Japan, Australia, and the U.S., and continues to work more vehemently with non-traditional like-minded like India. So this is, of course, a step into the right direction. European Union has also established a maritime cooperative framework with the Philippines, of course, and Canada has also been involved in this aspect as well. So the Philippines is now leveraging its centrality in Indo-Pacific geopolitics to not only improve its diplomatic connectivity, but of course inch closer to its desire of more effectively securing its sovereignty and sovereign rights. But of course, at the end of the day, we have to understand that this is a means to an end and not an end in itself. The Philippines is not adherent to bloc politics, but rather to use its network in line with the goal of securing its territorial integrity, sovereignty, and sovereign rights.
Well, Don, as you mentioned, the geopolitical repercussions goes further than just the stakeholders of the South China Sea. Now, Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs scholar at Taipei's National Chengchi University, Kumari Mansi, gave us a sense of the implications on India. That's a country embroiled in a long-standing border dispute with China. So, Don, how do you view India's increasing role in the South China Sea? And does the Philippines look south at all to counter China's assertions and aggressions?
Right, and Dr. Mansi has actually mentioned it quite effectively. India's position as an Indo-Pacific power reflects on the highly interconnected security dynamics of not only the Indian Ocean but also the Western Pacific. And this is why India has been taking a more proactive stance in voicing out the concerns of its partners in Southeast Asia towards the need to stabilize the situation in the South China Sea. Of course, India has also been stepping up its security relations with countries in Southeast Asia, the elevating of ties with ASEAN to a comprehensive security partnership, and with individual countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam, for example, creating new army-to-army, navy-to-navy annual exercises is also this. And in the Philippines in particular, the Philippines is now looking more positively towards India as a vital partner. And in fact, since 2016, India has also been included in Manila's defense calculations in areas that were once only reserved for Manila's traditional partners. And this is, of course, the realization that India and Manila share the same aspect of strategic convergence towards stability of the rules-based order in the entire Indo-Pacific.
Right. We're just about running out of time here, but before we go, as you know, Taiwan watches very closely what's happening in the South China Seas for various reasons. And from the Philippines' experience, what do you think the takeaway should be for Taiwan?
Well, the thing here is that we must maintain external and external balancing, right? Internal in terms of harmonizing national policies, a whole of a nation approach in order to solidify domestic resources towards the protection of our sovereignty and sovereign rights. And at the same time, opening up to relations with external forces that also share similar goals. And of course, while there may be certain political issues in terms of this external relationship, but we can definitely say that Taiwan's role as a democratic force in the Indo-Pacific is undeniable. And of course, not only in terms of security, but in terms of health and other aspects of technology, Taiwan's role is undeniable. So we are now looking into ways of synergy between and among countries, like-minded countries, and how to contribute towards strengthening the rules-based order in the region amidst revisionist forces.
Okay, Don, before we go, I want to take you to Taiping Island, which is also known as Ituaba. It is the biggest natural feature in the Spratly Islands, and it's administered by Taiwan, but also claimed by China, the Philippines, and Vietnam. These images were captured by Italian photojournalist Alberto Buzzola. And before we go, a huge thank you to you, Don McLain Gill, lecturer at the Department of International Studies at Salle University, speaking to us from Manila. It's been great to speak to you, Don.
Thank you so much, Divya. It's a true pleasure and honor. Looking forward to speaking again soon.
And I'm sure we'll be continuing this conversation. And as always, thank you to our viewers. It's been good to have your company. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.